Hello everyone, welcome to my update US gossip channel. Dante had been walking a tightrope of suspicion and uncertainty for weeks, his mind tangled in every fragment of memory, every slip of behavior, and every shadow of doubt cast by Michael's presence in their lives, a presence that had always been smooth, calculated, and disturbingly untraceable, a presence that no one would have guessed harbored such violent intent. And yet something about that night when Drew had been shot had gnawed at Dante relentlessly, a relentless itch in the recesses of his thoughts that refused to let him rest, a whisper that refused to be ignored, and so Dante immersed himself in every scrap of evidence, every recording, every witness testimony, every overlooked detail from the crime scene, returning to it over and over, retracing the steps of everyone involved, comparing timelines, dissecting alibis, and parsing the nuances of body language that had seemed insignificant at the time, until slowly, with the meticulous patience of a surgeon, he began to see the outline of the truth emerging from the chaos, a truth that had been meticulously concealed by Michael's cunning manipulation, a truth hidden beneath layers of lies, half-truths, and diversions, each one crafted with the intent of throwing suspicion off himself. And as Dante sifted through security footage from the surrounding areas, grainy as it was, he noticed a subtle movement in the corner of one frame, a figure that didn't belong there at the time everyone else had reported being somewhere else, a figure whose gait, posture, and even the way the coat flapped around the legs were unmistakably Michael's, and Dante's heart began to race because this was the first tangible, unshakable proof he had been searching for, something that could not be denied, manipulated, or rationalized away. And then there was the ballistic evidence, which had always been strangely inconclusive, or so it seemed because Dante, driven by an obsession that had become almost a compulsion, decided to examine the reports himself, cross-referencing the ballistic markings on the bullet with the firearm registry, comparing rifling patterns, angles, and residue, and after hours of painstaking analysis, he discovered a minute, almost imperceptible match that linked the gun used in the shooting to a weapon Michael had access to, a gun he had claimed to have lent to someone else that night, a gun that had been washed clean of fingerprints, yet the microscopic striations and marks on the bullet were like a fingerprint in themselves, impossible to erase, undeniable, and Dante felt a surge of both triumph and dread because this was it, the moment when the puzzle pieces aligned, when every contradiction and every suspicious action that Michael had orchestrated began to coalesce into a coherent, damning picture. And Dante didn't stop there. He traced digital communications, intercepted deleted texts, and scoured metadata from devices that had been written off as irrelevant, reconstructing conversations that had been shredded by auto-delete features, only to find messages that revealed a carefully constructed alibi that had been forwarded between Michael and an accomplice, messages that were innocuous on the surface but whose timing and wording were insidious in the light of what Dante now knew, and the forensic accountant work, the movements of money, the transfers that didn't add up, all painted the same story. Michael had planned, executed, and attempted to cover up the shooting, and each discovery piled onto the last, forming a mountain of evidence so high and so irrefutable that Dante knew it would topple Michael if ever presented in court. Yet it wasn't just the physical evidence that solidified Dante's conviction, it was the psychological breadcrumbs Michael had inadvertently left behind, the twitch in his eye when certain subjects came up, the subtle stutter in his speech, the avoidance of Drew's name, the overcompensation in defending the narrative he had crafted for everyone else, all the little tells that a seasoned observer like Dante could not miss. And piecing these together with the concrete evidence created a tapestry of guilt so vivid that it burned into Dante's mind, a mental image of the night, replayed and reconstructed, the sound of the gunshot echoing in the alleyway, Drew's shocked expression, the way Michael had moved, a blur of motion that in the moment had seemed like coincidence but now was clearly deliberate, and as Dante built the case in his mind, connecting every cross-checking every angle, he felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief at finally knowing the truth, and horror at the realization that someone so close to them, someone who had hidden behind a veneer of normalcy, could commit such a violent act. And then came the breakthrough that would finally tie everything together. Dante, revisiting the scene with fresh eyes and armed with all his new evidence, noticed an overlooked surveillance blind spot near the dumpster behind the building, a shadowy area where the trajectory of the bullet could be extrapolated, and by reconstructing the angle of entry and exit, he was able to prove definitively that the shot could only have come from the position Michael had been in, a position that no one else had occupied, a position he had pretended was impossible to be in, and Dante marveled at the precision of this discovery, the way the universe, through chance or justice, had placed this final puzzle piece within reach, and he didn't stop. He obtained fingerprints from nearby objects, found gunpowder residue on Michael's clothing that he had washed in vain to remove, and matched fibers from Michael's coat to fibers found at the scene, each layer of evidence strengthening the others, converging to create a web of irrefutable proof, a net from which Michael could not escape. And the more Dante analyzed, the more he realized the scope of deception, how Michael had manipulated friends, feigned ignorance, and constructed narratives that painted him as concerned, worried, innocent, all while hiding the chilling reality of his actions. And Dante, with painstaking care, documented everything, compiled every photo, every forensic report, every digital trace, every eyewitness account into a single cohesive dossier that left no room for doubt, a dossier that would lay bare the truth, expose the lies, and ensure that justice for Drew could finally be served. And in the quiet moments of reflection, Dante allowed himself a fleeting sense of satisfaction, a vindication that came not from vengeance but from the clarity of truth, because he had pursued this relentlessly, followed every lead, questioned every assumption, and now the evidence spoke louder than words, louder than excuses, louder than the carefully curated facade Michael had maintained for so long. And as Dante prepared to confront the reality of what he had uncovered, he felt a surge of purpose, a moral responsibility to ensure that this truth, painstakingly unearthed, would not be ignored, that the life that had been violently interrupted would not be forgotten, and that Michael, despite his attempts to evade accountability, would finally face the consequences of his actions. And Dante's mind raced with the implications, the conversations he would have, the careful strategies he would employ to present this mountain of evidence in a way that was undeniable, meticulous, and devastating in its clarity, knowing that every piece had been verified, every angle cross-checked, every narrative carefully reconstructed to reveal the truth in its unvarnished form. And in that process, Dante realized something profound about the nature of justice, the fragility of truth, and the resilience required to unearth it from beneath layers of deceit. Because this was more than just proving that Michael had shot Drew, it was about restoring order, affirming morality, and asserting that even the most cunning and calculated wrongdoings could not remain hidden when faced with relentless scrutiny. And as he assembled the final reports, analyzed the ballistic diagrams one last time, cross-referenced the timelines, and double-checked the forensic evidence, he felt a surge of clarity and certainty, a rare alignment of intuition and empirical proof that left no room for denial, no room for rationalization, no room for escape. And with every detail documented and corroborated, Dante finally understood that he held the key to justice, that every sleepless night, every painstaking analysis, every moment of doubt and suspicion had led to this point, and now he could step forward with the truth, armed with incontrovertible evidence, prepared to confront Michael, prepared to lay bare the crime, and prepared to honor Drew's memory with the vindication that had been so long delayed. Because at last, the puzzle was complete, the shadows dispersed, and the evidence, painstakingly gathered, incontrovertibly proved that Michael was the one who had shot Drew, a truth that could no longer be denied, a reality that would ripple through the lives of everyone involved, and a justice that Dante had fought tirelessly to uncover, a justice that was finally within reach. Dante had been chasing shadows for weeks, following every lead, interrogating every suspect, and piecing together fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly into place. And yet tonight, as he stood alone in the dimly lit storage room behind the abandoned warehouse, the weight of the evidence in his hands made his pulse accelerate, a violent drumbeat that echoed in his skull like the memory of the gunshot that had shattered Drew's life. And Dante knew, with a chilling certainty that settled like ice in his stomach, that the pieces were finally falling together to reveal the unthinkable. Michael, the one person Dante had once considered a friend, the man whose calm, calculating demeanor had always been the source of comfort to everyone around him, had pulled the trigger, and the proof was in the small, almost insignificant details that no one else would have noticed. Not the blood-stained cufflink buried beneath the crushed cardboard boxes, not the faint imprint of a shoe that matched Michael's, not the tiny scrap of fabric torn from the sleeve of his favorite jacket, all of which seemed to mock Dante now, whispering the truth in a language only he could understand. And as he crouched there, fingers trembling slightly, eyes scanning every corner for fear that someone might appear out of the shadows and snatch it all away. He felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread, exhilaration because justice, finally, seemed within reach, but dread because the man responsible was not a stranger, not a cold, faceless criminal who could be handed over to the authorities without remorse, but Michael, whose betrayal was sharper than any knife and more dangerous than any bullet. And Dante's mind raced with memories of their interactions over the past months, the subtle manipulations, the sly comments, the way Michael had always seemed to be one step ahead, and now, Dante realized, it had all been a mask, a carefully constructed persona designed to keep everyone, including him, off balance, blind to the storm brewing underneath, and the evidence in his hands, this seemingly mundane collection of items, was the thread that would unravel everything, and yet as he held it, as he traced the jagged edge of the cufflink, the sticky residue of gunpowder still faintly clinging to it, he wondered if he was ready for the confrontation that was inevitable, because Michael was not a man who would surrender easily, and Dante knew that exposing him would not just bring relief to Drew's family, it would ignite a firestorm, a confrontation that could consume them all, yet even with that knowledge, he couldn't turn back now, couldn't ignore the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. And so he painstakingly documented every detail, snapping photos with his phone, making notes in his battered notebook, cross-referencing the items with security footage.